When I was 12, I lived in a small town where drugs were a pretty big issue. It didn't help that my parents moved into a house that was also on the side of town where a lot of crime was. One day, my mom and I got into a massive argument. There were only 14 years between us, so our fights go out of hand sometimes. She and my little sister decided to go to the store to blow off some steam. About an hour later, I went into the kitchen to pour myself some tea. Just so it isn't confusing in the next part, our kitchen was attached to our front door. When you walked into the house, you'd immediately be facing the kitchen table and the fridge. I was standing at the table, pouring myself a glass when I heard walking up to the door. I figured out it was my mom coming back because she had been gone for an hour already. I didn't look up until I heard our front screen door open very slowly. My family always flung the door open, so I knew something was off. When I looked up, I was staring at a very tall, unkempt man who was smiling at me while holding the door handle. People always say their fight or flight kicks in, but I experienced something more horrifying. I froze. He kept eye contact with me while he slowly opened the door. My mom didn't lock it when she left. I couldn't move, and my mind wasn't processing anything until I heard snarling. I looked down just in time to see my long-haired German Shepherd, Dante, go into full attack mode. This scared me and the guy. He took off the other way, off our porch, but he didn't shut the door. I then realized I was standing in an empty kitchen because my dog went after him. I finally regained feeling in my legs and took off after my dog, screaming for him to come back. He started running back just as my mom pulled up and asked how he got loose. When I told her what happened, she went pale and called the police. I gave a statement, but nothing ever came up of it. To the guy who tried to break into my house and do who knows what, my dog would gladly still like to meet you. Also, to give everyone an idea on how big our dog was, he was 6 feet when standing on his hind legs. I was born and raised in South Carolina. It was always tough living here because I'm an African American lady. My family and I grew up in an upper middle class neighborhood. Both my parents are immigrants who work hard to give my siblings and I a good life. So it was a Saturday evening when my parents went out on a date. I was 14 at that time, and they trusted I would be able to babysit my little brother and sister. I have done this a million times before, so I wasn't worried. They left the house at around 8 and promised to be back no later than 11 p.m. Everything seemed perfectly fine at first. My brother was in the first living room playing on his Xbox. I was on the couch near him using my phone, and my sister was upstairs in our room messing with her tablet. Now, the layout of the house was something like this. Apologies in advance for the bad wording. When you open the front door, and immediately to your right, you have the first living room. That leads into a dining room, which leads into the kitchen. The kitchen is open and leads into the second living room. From there, you can access the backyard and door to the garage. On the left side of the front door, you can go up the stairs to the bedrooms. On one side of the hall, you have my sister and I's room and the bathroom, and on the other, you have the master's bedroom and my brother's room. Anyway, I'm sitting on the couch with my brother. I then hear the garage door being opened. It was only around 9 p.m. and I knew my parents would never come back home this early. So I got up to meet them at the door and see why. Whenever they leave, I always make sure the door from the garage is locked. So I usually have to let them in. I walk up to the door, and just as I was about to open it, I stopped. I felt kinda anxious for whatever reason and didn't want to open the door up until I heard it was them. I see the doorknob wiggle violently and I got scared and stepped back. I called out.
Mom?
No response.
Dad, is that you? Stop messing around.
Nothing. I started to get really scared.
Dad, if this is you, please say something. I'm getting scared.
After I said this, the wiggling got way more violent. It looked like the door was going to burst at any moment. By this point, my brother stopped playing his game and ran into the kitchen. Fearing for our lives, I ran into the kitchen, grabbed one of the biggest knives we had, took my brother's hand, and ran upstairs. There, I grabbed my sister and ran into my brother's room. By now, I heard the door burst open. I locked the door and hid my siblings in the closet, while I pushed the dresser in front of the door to barricade it. After I did that, I sat on his bed and called the cops. The operator got all of my details and said the cops would be there in 5 minutes. As I sat on the bed, I felt absolutely terrified. My mind was completely blank until I heard running up the stairs. The light sobbing in the closet from my siblings turned into fearful screams, and I had my back against the wall, shaking as I held the knife in front of me. I heard them burst through each door. Eventually, they get to the end of the hall, where my brother's room was, and try to open the door. They got pissed and start banging and yelling at us to open up. I could tell by the voice that this was a man. Eventually, he's able to burst the lock and slide the door open. We lock eyes as he tried to get past my little makeshift barricade. I get a good look at his face and features. He couldn't have been more than 5'10" and had a stocky build and a very deep voice. He had, at least to me, very obviously gotten cosmetic surgery. His face looked incredibly artificial. His skin had this unnatural smoothness to it. He had these glossy big lips, and his eyes seemed to be just a little too big. I was on the verge of tears when I just yelled,
Don't come any closer. The police are on their way.
That seemed to stop him in his tracks. He took one last look at me when he ran down the stairs and out the front door. I ran to the closet to check on my siblings and see if they were all right. They are pretty scared, but other than that, they were all right. I heard the police finally pull up to my house about a minute later. An officer came in and yelled to see if we were all right. I remember being taken to the station with my siblings and calling my parents on the way too. We filed a report, but nothing came of it. I remember being so angry about it. There couldn't be that many people who look like that in South Carolina. How was it so hard to find someone who left the crime scene within minutes before them arriving? So, creepy plastic surgery guy, let's not meet again. A few years ago, I was renting a house in Northern California. The neighborhood was just outside the suburbs. It seemed like the perfect balance of having space and having nice neighbors close enough not to feel isolated. The area had no streetlights, so it was very dark at night, especially if there were clouds blocking the moonlight. It didn't bother me though. It made my little house feel even more quaint on dark nights. I got home from work one day in midwinter. It was a cloudy night, so pulling up to my house, I saw only what my headlights and front porch light illuminated. When I got out of my car, I caught a whiff of cigarette smoke. That was odd, as I never smelled that before around my house. I didn't see anyone nearby, so I ignored it and went inside. I had just got off a shift with a few hours of overtime, so I felt pretty tired Even though it wasn't even 7 yet, I decided to take a shower and call it a night. I woke up some time later, sure that I had heard a noise inside my house. I wasn't worried right away because my friend would sometimes stop by to use my shower after work on his way to his night classes. I even gave him a spare key so he could stop by even if I wasn't home. He would always text me to let me know beforehand though, and I hadn't heard my phone go off. I reached over to my bedside table and picked up my cell phone to see if my friend had sent me a text. The bright light from my phone screen and numbers had blinded me. These were the days before phones had a light sensor that would dim the screen in the dark, and this particular phone was so bright I could use it as a flashlight. Though I squinted my eyes, I could make out that it was 9 something, but I couldn't tell if I had an unread text or not. I set my phone aside and called out my friend's name. There were a couple of seconds of silence before I heard loud footfalls as someone started running through the bottom floor of my house. I leaped out of my bed and ran to the closet. They were already up the stairs by the time I had opened the door and stepped inside. That house had 3 rooms upstairs, 2 bedrooms on either side of the hallway, the one I was in and a spare, and a bathroom at the end. The bedroom doors were both closed, but the bathroom door was cracked open. I heard whoever was in my house thunder down the hallway, past my door and into the bathroom. Thank God he did. That gave me enough time to open the attic access in the ceiling of my closet and hoist myself up. I had just started lift myself up when the person ran back out of the bathroom. My feet were barely inside of the attic when my bedroom door burst open. I heard footsteps run into my room and stop. When they didn't see me in the room, they ran back to the hallway and into the other room, which just had boxes stacked in a corner, some weights, and a table where I painted my miniature models. I guess they decided that if someone were hiding, it would be in the bedroom because they charged back into my room and turned on the light. A moment later, the closet door was ripped open. I was crouched in my attic, just a foot or so away from the access, so I could try to stop them if they started to climb up. From my vantage point, all I could see was from their knee down. They were wearing dirty blue jeans with frayed cuffs and worn work boots. After a few seconds of looking in the closet, they stepped away, and I heard a loud crash come from my room, followed by a scream of frustration and anger. That scream was the most unnerving part of the incident for me. It reminded me far too much of my stepfather, who would scream in a similar way when he lost his temper. He would eventually be put in a mental hospital for several mental disorders that resulted in erratic and violent tendencies. The man in my house ran back downstairs. I heard crashes and clatters as things were thrown around and furniture was knocked over. I stayed crouched in the attic. I had left my phone when I ran for the closet, and I wasn't certain if I could climb down without him hearing. After some time, the noises stopped. I started counting slowly. When I reached 1,000, I decided it was safe enough to climb down and call the police. The first thing I noticed when I exited the closet was the intruder had flipped my bed over, I assume in an attempt to find me. That was the loud noise I had heard after he stepped away from the closet. I couldn't find my cell phone, so I went to the landline by my bed and called the police. I waited in my room until I heard them call out from downstairs. The first floor was a mess, but I had expected that. Chairs had been knocked over, the sofa had been flipped, all the books, pictures, and knickknacks I had on my shelves were strewn across the floor. The cupboards in the kitchen had been opened, and all the boxes and canned foods had been thrown on the ground. As far as I could tell though, The only thing missing was a single knife out of the wooden block in my kitchen. The police checked the house from top to bottom. They found that the side door had been forced open by something like a crowbar. They also found a few cigarette butts along my fence line, along with some foil and an empty pen tube, which the police said people often use to smoke meth. So they think he had been watching my house for a while. I realized that he must have been out there smoking a cigarette when I got home. They collected up the evidence and told me I should stay with family or friends that night and get the door fixed as soon as possible. I opted to just not sleep. I moved a shelf over to block the broken door and spent the next couple hours cleaning things up. I would often go to the window with a flashlight and shine it along the fence line where the police found the cigarette butts and foil, but I didn't see anything. The next day, I called to have the door fixed and motion lights installed at the back and side of the house. I ran a phone cable up into the attic and added a landline. I never wanted to be stuck up there without a phone again. Nothing else happened at the house though. I lived there for 3 years without incident. One more precaution I took was practicing getting out of my bed, going to my closet, and climbing into the attic as quickly and quietly as possible. I even kept at it when I moved, except now I go to a crawl space at the back of the closet instead of attic. I try not to think about what would have happened if I had been a bit slower getting to the attic, or if he hadn't gone into the bathroom at the end of the hall first. I have been thinking about this story a lot. I had a nightmare about it recently, and after telling it to my boyfriend for the first time, he said that maybe writing about it will help. I often do write to cope with things, so I figured I might as well get a little karma out of my story. This story takes place 10 years ago. I was 13 at that time. I grew up on an old farmhouse far out on a rural road. Cornfields surrounded our home, and our closest neighbors were 2 to 3 miles away. The closest town was a 15-minute drive. One thing that was really nice about living out there was that you didn't get a lot of strangers knocking at your door to either sell or talk religion with you, but we did get few. One night, it was just my mother and I home making baked goods for a fundraiser for my little brother's Boy Scout troop. Dad and brother were out helping my uncle with some cows, if I remember right. We were bustling around the kitchen, talking and laughing. Mom and I have always been close. Soon, we heard a knock at the door. Just a normal average knock. My mom hummed to herself and took off her dish gloves to open the door. I stood at the kitchen island, rolling out some dough for a couple of pies, but also watching my mother go to the door. I had a slight twinge of anxiety in my stomach, but chalked it up as being one of my normal flurries. As my mom walked towards the door, the person on the other side gave another tap, this time in a rhythm. My mom stopped. She turned and started walking back into the kitchen with a look on her face. She went to our kitchen window that faced out towards our porch. She went to the side where you'd be able to see the porch clearly. Mom pulled the curtain back just enough to peek and it not be noticed from the outside. The look on her face deepened. She went to the other side of the window then, to look out at the driveway. I had stopped what I was doing altogether at this point, deciding that the pie crusts probably weren't important in this moment, as the feeling in my stomach was in a fully blown fury. Mom's eyes widened as she looked out. She closed the curtain and looked at the floor. The look in her face was angry, but also scared. She walked over and grabbed my wrist. She walked us to the closet and as she quietly asked if I had my cell phone, I did. She pulled out my dad's prized Louisville Slugger out of the closet. The person at the door started banging the door hard. I gasped a bit. Mom looked at me and shushed me. She then took my arm again and walked me towards my parents' bedroom, locking the doors and windows as we went. At one point, she stopped at the window in our living room and peeked out of it. She closed it quickly and let out a frustrated noise. We got to the bedroom and she pulled me in and locked the door. She took my phone and began dialing as she gave me the bat, sat me down on the floor on the side where I'd be hidden from the door, and opened the closet to get the gun case. She talked quietly into the phone. I was terrified and I couldn't focus on what she was saying. She pulled out my dad's shotgun and loaded it quickly. I looked at her, scared, as she hung up. She pulled me up again and walked me out of the bedroom. We creeped back over to the other side of the house where the bathroom was. Mom gave me my phone and ushered me inside. She set down the gun and looked at me with both hands on my shoulders.
Sis, you need to listen to me. There are some men outside, and they're walking around the sides of the house.
I looked at her with wide eyes. I could feel myself shaking. Why? What do they want?
I don't know, but you need to stay in here, lock the door, and don't come out until I tell you to. Understand me?
I nodded and she squeezed my shoulders.
I am going to barricade the door from the other side. I will not move the barricade until I let you know that it's me.
I knew what she was saying immediately. I crawled out the bathroom window and ran if it's moved otherwise. My mom shut the door and I quickly locked it. I heard her move the quilt chest in front of the door, a very heavy box with lots of quilts from over the years. I sat on the floor in front of the window, clutching the baseball bat. I sat there for what seemed like hours, but was actually 5 minutes. While I was there, I heard footsteps outside the window, 2 deep voices quietly talking.
You sure they're in here? Maybe nobody's home.
No, man. There's at least 2 women here. I heard them talking at the door. Saw a guy and a kid leave when we passed the house earlier.
I shivered and started to hyperventilate, but quickly covered my face with a towel to mute it. Who were they? What did they want? Why were they here? Soon, I heard another voice.
Guys, come on, let's go. Charlie spotted cops down the road.
Then I heard 3 sets of feet running off towards the front of the house. I was crying at this point, tears pouring down my face. Was it over? Were they leaving? A few more minutes go by and I heard a man's voice in the house. I started to panic and huddled into the corner of the bathroom. I heard my mom's voice on the other side of the bathroom door.
Sis, it's me. The sheriff's here. They're gone. I'm moving the trunk.
I got up and unlocked the door and opened it to find the sheriff and my mom moving the trunk out of the way. I ran quickly into my mom's arms and we just stood there holding each other. The sheriff said he had a few more officers chasing down the van and that he needed to ask my mom and I some questions. My mom nodded and we walked to the kitchen where the smell of burnt cookies was in the air. The sheriff asked us questions and that when I found out what my mom saw. When she looked out and saw the man who was knocking at our door, she knew something was off immediately. He was casually dressed, gym shorts and a wife beater. Not something a salesman or people of a church would wear when coming around. So then my mom thought that maybe his car broke down or something and he was looking for help. So she looked out of the drive and saw something that made her stomach drop. There was a van in our drive, parked in a way that wouldn't allow my mother's car to leave, with a man in the passenger seat and another leaning in towards the front of the van, talking to the passenger guy. But Mom noticed that even they were sitting still, the van was still slightly rocking, like there were more people inside. as my mom and I were finishing up with the sheriff when a deputy walked in. He looked pale. He looked at my mom and the sheriff and me.
Sir, we were able to catch up with the van. They lost control and swerved into the ditch actually.
Any of those bastards hurt?
No, sir. They're all fine. But, we do have them in custody.
The sheriff quirked an eyebrow.
There were 5 men in the van. We asked them what they were doing out and why they walked around the house like they did.
And what did they say?
They said they were vacuum salesmen, sir. That they were a team out trying to sell the product they made.
The sheriff scoffed a bit.
Well, Jones ended up checking the van and, well...
Well, what? Do you have a drug bust or something?
The deputy gulped and looked at my mom and me again.
No, sir. That is not what we found at all.
They took my mom outside and told her what they found. She was horrified and came back in sobbing and holding me. After that, they phoned my dad and he came rushing home. My other uncle, a mountain man, stayed the night just in case. Dad and mom spent no excuse on a home security system after that and taught both of us kids how to shoot and load a gun. My aunt and uncle gave us one of their German Shepherd's puppies as well. My mom had him trained to be an attack dog. Though you wouldn't be able to tell, when not in defense, he was a dopey, lovable pup. This still wasn't enough to settle my mom though. My brother and I ended up going to a self-defense lesson as well. My cousins were sent with us. It wasn't until a few years later that I found out what was in the van. Coincidentally, we were making cookies and other homemade candy for a Christmas party. I finally asked my mom about it, and she was shocked that I asked, but knew that I'd found out eventually. So, what they found in the van were rope, tape, burlap sacks, and even sedatives, as well as guns, and what the police described as burner phones. When they had taken all the guys back, and after a few hours of questioning, one of them broke and said that they were having no luck in nabbing anyone in town. So they went out on rural areas. The closest town is a very tight-knit community where everyone watches each other's backs. This terrified me. I would never have guessed to this day. I'm very, very careful about whom I open the door for, and I can sleep unless I have some sort of weapon in the bedside table. This really shattered my trust in other people. I go out and automatically assume most people are going to hurt me. My therapist is trying to help me with this. I sincerely hope that I never have to go through a situation like this again.